and the NFL draft is coming up severely into focus. What are the Minnesota Vikings going to do? There are a lot of people that have a lot of different opinions. Well, let's take a look at the trends. What was going on before free agency? What's going on afterwards? And how can we project all that information moving forward? Plus, we'll talk about my 7-round mock draft from Friday and do a 7-round mock draft live on the show tonight. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner, he is producer Dave. We got Marzipan floating around here somewhere, chewing on one of the 6 bones I have in my office. We are ready to talk Minnesota Vikings. I want to start off with this, and then we're going to go right into the NFL draft discussion. Ryan Tannehill. The Vikings have met with Ryan Tannehill, discussing potentially bringing him on. I thought it was interesting because, one, Tannehill doesn't count toward the compensatory formula, Dave, but also he was very vocal in 2022 about how it's not his job to mentor a quarterback. I'm curious if that still holds true with him today, because it's a little bit of a different situation. In Tennessee, he was trying to keep his job. This would be, we're bringing you in to be the mentor of the backup. Would his mentality shift? I think that's an interesting discussion point that I'm going to be honest, I don't think we can answer. We can project, we can guess, but we can't say anything with any kind of certainty or clarity because we just don't know unless he explicitly tells us X, Y, or Z. I do find that interesting. I also find it interesting that there was discussion about how the Vikings aren't necessarily committed to playing J.J. McCarthy because they're having discussions with Tannehill. I think that's bogus. They're very committed to J.J. McCarthy. The entire offseason was to get J.J. McCarthy ready to go. And I think the Vikings are in a really good spot to get him ready to go. I'm very intrigued to see what ends up happening with the Minnesota Vikings. I'm very excited to see how they manifest everything themselves. It's a fascinating time with this Minnesota Vikings team in this offseason because we know what they've done, but it's how is that all going to work? How is that all going to manifest itself once they get on the field? Can J.J. McCarthy duplicate his preseason performance as QB1 against big boy defenses? How will he adapt to all of the personnel around him? What about Brian Flores' defense? Will they take a step forward with the added talent, or will they take a step back because they've been figured out? And I'm not implying that they have been figured out, but you have to always wonder when teams have months to figure you out if they're able to. And I find that all that very intriguing. We're going to get into a lot of that as the year goes on. But the Ryan Tannehill bit is a really intriguing one that we're going to keep our eyes on because it could answer a multitude of questions for us, Dave.
Now, did he visit or did they just have a conversation?
So let me pull up. It was a tweet from Jordan Schultz. I think they discussed the possibility of bringing him in. Let me get the exact vernacular because I think that's the most important part.
A visit is, hey, come check out our, training room and our weight room and eat a meal in our cafeteria.
Here's a tweet. Sources. The Vikings have had discussions with former Titans QB Ryan Tannehill about a potential deal. Talks are ongoing and nothing is imminent right now, sources tell NFL on Fox. So they've had discussions about a potential deal. They're just talking. Not doing anything more than that. They're talking. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with talking. They should talk, Dave. They should have conversations. They should try to figure out a way to reach a deal. That's the same with pretty much any free agent. If you're going to talk to them, unless you're trying to get blatant info from them about somebody else, you're talking about a contract. You're talking about a deal. And I think Tannehill will be a good option. You know, he was the 8th overall pick in 2012. He did flame out of Miami. They traded him for peanuts to the Titans. And then he had a career resurgence with Tennessee. He's also an athletic quarterback. Because remember, most people don't realize this, but Tannehill, his first 2 years at Texas A&M, was a wide receiver. He was not a quarterback. They did move him to quarterback. He would end up being very successful. He was the 8th overall pick after all. So all of those factors.
Usually it goes the other way around.
I know. Usually they start at quarterback and go somewhere else. Marzipan, get over here. Good girl. And that ability to be that dual threat guy, I think, is a really intriguing aspect to this whole conversation. Are they going to be able to use Tannehill's abilities and knowledge to extract more from J.J. McCarthy? I think the answer that they're going to conclude is we believe, yes, that would be the case. So how does that manifest in reality? How do they end up making that work? I can't wait. I want to see what happens. I want to see how it works. I want to see how they do it. Because it's a very, very interesting situation.
I find it fascinating, and his whole attitude of a couple years ago, that's interesting. And has that attitude changed? One of our viewers, Michael Stuziak, says he probably thinks it's changed just because of where he is in his career. At his age, is he going to be, hey, I'm holding out for a starter gig like Aaron Rodgers? Or is he, resigned to say, hey, I can extend my career another few years by being a backup?
And I alluded to it when we started talking about the whole Tannehill thing at the top, Dave. He's not the incumbent. He is being signed as a free agent for a specific role. It's different. It's a different mindset. It's a different set of expectations. It's, hey, you are not a starter for us because we have that starter, but we believe you have immense value as a backup. And if you were to start, we know we could trust you to be able to win a few games with what we have on the roster. Marzi, you don't chew on those things.
Yes,
roster dogs are bad.
J.J. McCarthy will be the starter this season. Darren and I talked quite a bit about it yesterday.
Yep.
On Two Old Bloggers.
I recommend you go check it out. It's one of the better Two Old Bloggers episodes performance-wise that we've ever had, which is a huge testament to this great group of people that we have watching us every single week. Don't forget, best way you can help the channel. Look, every YouTube channel tells you this, and we're going to be the same. Subscribe. Like our stuff. Throw a comment in the comment section. Turn those notifications on so you know whenever we go live, because when stuff happens, guess who's going to be there for you? Dave and Tyler. We're going to be there for you. We're going to talk about those things. So it's really important that you do those things because it helps us. And you know what? It's free. You don't have to pay anything, but you can pay us. I'll throw my Venmo up in the chat. I'm kidding. I'm going to throw my Venmo up in the chat. But subscribe. It makes a difference. And if you're listening on podcast, subscribe to that too, or to both. It'd be great. But you're going to get a lot of great stuff throughout the rest of the draft season and into the offseason. And then 2025. We're not going anywhere. We're just getting started, and it's a lot of fun. So everybody knows that my forte is the NFL draft. I love the NFL draft. And one thing that I do that is more comprehensive than anybody else in the industry is I track mock drafts. And I track them from an industry perspective. I have thresholds where I will include some and I won't include others based on the respect that the outlet has, the credibility, and also the credibility of the analyst. Because maybe they're not in a like working for a credible outlet. Like if somebody starts their own Substack, like a newsletter, but I believe they are credible, I'll include them. And yeah, sure, some of that data is going to be a little bit subjective because it's my own beliefs on how quality of an analyst I believe they are. But outlets like Sports Illustrated, CBS, ESPN, they're all included in there. So far, I've tracked 367 mock drafts since January 1. That's a lot. Last year, there was over 800. These last 6 weeks are going to be where things really, really spike up. And that was the same way last year. The week after the combine, there were 46 mocks. The week after free agency, 46. And the one in between was 33. It's when you take a look at that, you're starting to get some really good data on how the industry believes and views this Minnesota Vikings team and what they will do in the NFL draft. And one of the interesting things about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is he's kind of shown some differences in how he approaches things over the course of time. He started out really focusing on metrics like the 10-yard split. Why does the 10-yard split matter? And by focusing in on that, that's how they ended up really prioritizing their picks in 2022, and it didn't work out very well. As we moved forward, he evolved his approach, nailed, I think, the first 2 picks. Well, I think your mileage is going to vary on Mekhi Blackman, but he's trending towards being a hit. The knee injury definitely didn't help things, but Addison's a huge hit at 23. You get a plus starter like that at 23rd overall, that's huge. That's a great hit, and hits are very subjective. Like a Caleb Evans, you get a full year and a half of starting caliber play out of a 4th rounder. To me, that's a hit. Ed Ingram's at least a half a hit because he was a starter for 3 years. Was he a good starter? Yeah, that's very debatable. But you got a starter out of that, and he gave you some stretches of really good play. Jalen Naylor, wide receiver 3. That's a starting position in the NFL. That's a hit. You got anything out of a 6th-round pick that's more than special teams, that's a hit. So you obviously want those hits to come in round 1 and round 2, but he used draft picks to get TJ Hawkinson. He has been really smart about, hey, did not overspend to get the quarterback. You can argue he overspent to get Dallas Turner, but he hedged his bet to make sure he got the quarterback. And then from there, okay, we got the quarterback. Now I want this guy who's 8th on the consensus board, and I'm going to pay a little extra to go get him. So he's learning how to evolve within this process, and it's hard. This job is really difficult. So we've had some struggles trying to predict what he's going to do, but that's okay. We have enough of a data set now where I think we can start to really predict, and that's kind of what I wrote about. There's some really interesting points when we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings as far as draft trends, Dave. And we're using these trends per se when it comes to how the Vikings are being mocked in these mock drafts. Who are they being sent? Because I think you can draw some interesting trend lines. I know you have the data available to you that I have, Dave. Were you able to take a look at it and try and explore before we ended up getting started here tonight?
No, I wasn't. Now, I've looked at your data, over the last couple of weeks where it's going, but I have not pulled up the spreadsheet. And I've also done some other research on where it's trending in the last 2 weeks. Because as I explained to you, we start in January 1st. Mm-hmm. You did. And you started tracking mock drafts. Well, we get at the end of the season, teams start identifying, or fans start identifying what teams want or need spots to fill. And then we get into the all-star games, and then we go from there to the combine, and then from the combine through first wave of free agency, and then second wave of free agency, and that changes those needs, the perception of those needs. And it's perception based. And whether it's ESPN or Sports Illustrated or whomever is doing it, they're doing it at a national level the majority of the time. So it's a perception of their perception of who Minnesota needs. And that's the way they're going to go. But I find that those timing points from January to the All-Star game to the combine to free agency, all are points that change the way the media looks at it. And we're talking, there's some good analysts out there. There's the two different types. And then there's us fans. So I think it's a good database to have. It may indicate which direction Kwesi's going. Then again, it may not. He may go something totally different.
And I think that's one of the real intrigues when we're still learning about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And we had a semblance. We knew what Rick Spielman was going to do. Because he was a former scout, he was very rigid. He had thresholds. He had things that he looked for that he needed to see. Well, we don't necessarily have that with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and I actually think it's better that way because it's harder to understand from a market perspective what you're going to do if you don't really have these rigid thresholds. Like the Green Bay Packers, you kind of know what they're going to do. You get a curveball every now and then, but at the top of the draft, you know they're going to take a guy like Lucas Van Ness. That's just their archetype. That's what they want. Sometimes that guy's going to hit. Sometimes that guy's going to bust because you're taking a risk with what that archetype is. But Rashawn Gary has been a massive hit. People kind of made fun of them for that selection, myself included. And they've developed him really, really well. Now, was he good last year? No. But he was really good to get a massive contract from the Packers. They don't pay everybody. They pay guys that they believe in, that they've developed, that they've had in their building. They've been more willing to sign guys in free agency than they have in the past. That's been one of their evolutions as a franchise. Because other than like signing Sean Jones and Reggie White at the very beginning of free agency, they signed Charles Woodson, and that was pretty much it until recently. Like Charles Woodson and Julius Peppers, they don't sign people in free agency. That's never been their game. So seeing evolution there has been interesting. And we talk about the Packers and Rick Spielman because Kwesi's just not those guys. He's not a true football guy. He's a manager. And I think one of the tough parts about Kwesi is people forget what a manager is supposed to be. A manager is supposed to delegate, listen, and make decisions based on the information that his subordinates give him. Now, he's got to do his own work as well. But a good manager listens and makes decisions based on the pertinent information to the topic at hand. And that's what he does. People are like, oh, Kwesi doesn't deserve credit for the Jordan Addison pick. That was all Kevin O'Connell. Kwesi made the pick. We can't just not give Kwesi credit because, oh, Kevin O'Connell wanted him. Well, who do you think Kwesi's going to get input from? He's not going to intentionally draft somebody that Kevin O'Connell doesn't want on the roster. That's stupid.
Or I shouldn't say. Unlike Spielman, who signed a free agent who the coach didn't want. But a whole different story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very cohesive organization. They do the right things.
And Kwesi's learned. Yeah. Right? The first draft, he admitted he tried to win everything from the get-go, and the trade backs and you talked about going with the wrong metrics, but he traded back and tried to accumulate picks a la Rick Spielman, and he blew it for the most part. He blew that first draft, but in the second draft, he stayed pat. Jordan Addison hit there at 24, and they said, get it. And then last draft, they came in with a specific plan to get the quarterback of the future at basically whatever cost it was. And they ended up with 2 first-round players and the quarterback of the future. So he's learning, he's progressing, and I think that's a good deal. On top of having to manage everything. Yeah. It's not just draft picks. It's contracts. It's how the facility runs. It's everything.
And I think Kwesi's overall been a very good general manager. He's got flaws, but he's working to fix them, and we can see evidence of him working to fix it. And I think that's a good thing. Because let's tell you, if J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner both work out, which I would project that they both will at this point, based on everything that we know, you really can't say much about Kwesi anymore because of the improvement and the willingness to learn and adapt and grow. So
now I got a question. Are we going to hear his He's been extended this week because he's been scheduled for a Wednesday press conference.
No. I would guess no. I think this is the free agency press conference, but that's good because now I have more things to write about on Wednesday. That's always a good thing for me. I need things to write about this time of year. But let's talk about some of these NFL draft trends. And I found it really interesting, kind of taking a look. So I wrote a bunch of stuff. The top 10 players ahead of free agency. Okay. We'll go from 10 to 1 here. As far as how many selections. All right. Omari Hampton was 10th with 9 selections, the North Carolina running back. Alabama guard Tyler Booker was 9th at 16. Kenneth Grant, Michigan defensive tackle, was 8th at 17 picks. Malaki Starks, the Georgia safety, was 6th at 18 picks. At 6th was South Carolina safety Nick Emmanwori at 19. 5th is Notre Dame cornerback Benjamin Morrison at 22. 4th is Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan at 22. 3rd is East Carolina cornerback Siobhan Revel Jr. at 27. 2nd is Oregon DT Derek Harmon at 28. And 1st, Texas cornerback Jahdae Barron, who I personally would rather have as a nickel safety. But there are some who believe he's going to be an outside corner. Your mileage will vary on that. There's going to be disagreements, but he can do both. It's where do you prefer him? I think he's better as a safety. So I graded him at safety. And the reason why we kind of start there, we want to see how things change. We want to see how things trend. All right. So in this group, you have 3 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, 3 defensive tackles, a guard, and a running back. Not overly crazy. Feels about right for what the Vikings are and where they were trending. Now let's take a look at how things have just gone the last 2 weeks. There were 10 players that got 1 pick. Nolan, Grant, Ole Miss cornerback Trey Amos, Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell. That's my guy. Florida State cornerback Azareye'h Thomas. Texas A&M edge rusher Shamar Stewart. Ohio State offensive tackle Josh Simmons. Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts. Georgia edge / linebacker Jalen Walker. And Marshall edge Mike Green. All those guys got 1 selection. Now, usually each week there's around 10 to 15 different prospects that get sent to the Vikings. So there are 20 across 2 weeks. In those last 2 weeks, 10 players had multiple selections. I'm going to focus on the top 5, okay? Because you have some interesting names. Kelvin Banks Jr. at 6 with 5 selections was very interesting. Offensive tackle, left tackle from Texas. Some people want to kick him side to guard. Got slightly shorter arms, like 33.5. Not debilitating, but his skill set just might be better at guard, kind of like how Zach Martin was with the Cowboys, because he played tackle at Notre Dame. 5th was Siobhan Revel Jr. at 5. 4th was Jahdae Barron at 6. 3rd is Derek Harmon at 7. Tied for 1st, Nick Emmanwori and Malaki Starks. 18 apiece. There are plenty of people who thought the Vikings would go secondary. And it's very interesting when you look at things from a macro perspective over the course of like the long period. Starks and Emmanwori are your, I need to pull this up, are your 2nd and 3rd ranked players when it comes to how many selections they've got. Emmanwori is 37. Malaki Starks has 36. That's a significant difference, Dave.
That's why they made the thumbnail.
Yeah. I also think, and you can go read my scouting reports on them. If you go to my Twitter profile, my pinned tweet, there's a huge thread of every scouting report I've done, including a link to the database. So you can just click whenever you want to read one. Very, very, very easy. But it does signal to me that the Vikings are probably going to be more likely to take a safety. And now some of this is, this is all just signal from the media, which you're right. But I have data in the past, when you take a look at past years, Dave, that says, hey, the media is pretty good from an overall perspective of predicting. J.J. McCarthy was number 1 last year, 273 selections out of 838 total. Dallas Turner was 7th with 44 selections. Now remember, the Vikings only had one first-round pick until like March 15th. And then at that point, every mock draft had 2. So there was a little bit of variance from that perspective. But when you look at that, there's some interesting signal there. 2023 was the first year that I did it from January 1st on. We got 545 mock drafts. The first one, number 1 was Deonte Banks, corner from Maryland, with 62 selections. Number 2, Jordan Addison. So we have somewhat of a signal here that says, as a whole, the media is pretty good from a long-term perspective of predicting what the Vikings will do. 52 out of 545. That's over 10%, considering the wealth of prospects. Because, Dave, 54 different prospects in 2023. In 2024, we had less prospects at just 35. But already this year, we have 43 prospects. It's interesting. The different elements that the Vikings could handle, the different data points that we have, and kind of taking a look at where the Vikings are trending towards safety makes sense because of where the safety room is. Your safety room could just be Theo Jackson and other dudes next year. Josh Metellus is technically going to be a free agent after the season. I would suspect he gets it extended, but you never know till it happens. Harrison Smith is a year-to-year proposition at this point. So where do we go? I think safety is an interesting one, especially with how Brian Flores likes to play defense. He likes to have versatility. He likes to have somebody who could be a joker. He likes to just mess with your head. And having a guy like Malaki Starks, who's probably better on the back end than he is up in the box, where Emmanwori, I think, is inverse. I think he's better like as a rover, roaming around in the box, wanting to hit people. Then he can kind of carry tight ends and running backs. But they're both more than capable in the other spot. I think adding one of those guys would be really interesting because versatility is so key in Brian Flores' defense, but you still have to be a good football player. The reason why he prioritizes versatility is because he wants to be able to do a lot of different things and give you unique looks. That's why he loved the NASCAR package last year. And he had dudes to run it because Pat Jones and Jihad Ward could do stuff on the inside and really spring those outside pass rushers, spring blitzes, like do those crossfire blitzes with Blake Cashman. Crossfire, you have 2 guys and they go whoop. They basically flip sides and go into the other A gap. Pretty simple stuff, but you do it from a bunch of different looks, and all of a sudden, you're cooking with gas. The different looks, the versatile elements, they all come into play. And I think it's fascinating to kind of see what that might look like, especially when you talk about a guy like Emmanwori, a guy like Starks, or even Jahdae Barron, who's number 1 overall in selections for the Minnesota Vikings. How does that manifest itself? How do we look at that happening each individual time? How do we know that it's going to happen? How do we see it happening? The reason why, like, I have very high grades on Emmanwori and Starks. Starks needs a first-round grade for me. Emmanwori barely missed a first-round grade. The reason is safeties fall. I don't have the data in front of me, but safeties almost always fall farther than what they're supposed to, especially when you think about the consensus board. Kyle Hamilton, I believe, is a top 5 consensus board guy. Fell to 14. Derwin James was a top 10 consensus board guy. Fell to 17. It's not unrealistic to think one or both of those guys will be there for the Vikings. Not because they don't deserve to be, not because like teams won't take them, but because they play safety. And those guys just inherently fall farther than they should because it's just not viewed as valuable as other positions. Well, guess what? The Vikings will take it, will use it because they love 3 safety stuff. And when you have bigger guys like Emmanwori and Starks, you can do things with them. And I think we're seeing an interesting signal there that if one of those guys is there, media seems to think that they're going to go for it. And you know what? They probably should, Dave.
Have you watched Azareye'h Thomas, Florida State?
I have not watched Azareye'h Thomas yet.
Okay.
He's on my list, I promise. I just watched what do you call it? I watched Luther Burden, the Missouri wide receiver, yesterday. Good football player. Would not be opposed to taking him in round 1. It would be a little bit more of a luxury pick, but I think the Vikings can get away with the luxury pick from a long-term perspective. I think he fits in well long-term with what this Vikings team wants to be. And it gives you options when it comes to Jordan Addison. If you don't want to extend him, you can trade him because all of a sudden you have a replacement in hand. Flexibility is a huge thing for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. So, is wide receiver the best route? Nah, probably not. But I do think that there are elements that are very fascinating when it comes to this. Now, take a deep breath. Let's take a look at some other interesting elements, Dave. We have, and I already found an error that I need to fix. We have 8 different positions that have been selected. Now, there's been one wide receiver, but I am grouping Travis Hunter as a cornerback and wide receiver. So the only wide receiver has been a corner. There have been 11 offensive linemen, different ones, 46 total selections. So about like 12%. 9 cornerbacks and 123 selections. Now, I know I list Jahdae Barron as a safety, but everybody's listing him as a corner. So for this exercise, he's grouped as a corner. And 123, you're talking over 30% there. So that's a huge sample size. 8 different defensive tackle prospects for 85 selections, 5 running backs for 20, 5 edge rushers for 10, 6 edge rushers for 10, safety, 3 players, 75 selections. All but 2 of those are Nick Emmanwori and Malaki Starks, and 1 linebacker for 7. That is Jahad Campbell. Now, you could argue the 1 selection for Jalen Walker could be grouped linebacker. I graded him as an edge, so I'm grouping him as an edge. But I think that's an important caveat because you could put him as a linebacker. Overall, when you take a look, 27 defenders for 300 selections, 17 offensive players for just 67. Whole world thinks this team is going defense. And with the age of the defense, who can blame them? Is it the best route to go defense? Should they?
Depends who's available.
Yeah, I think you could argue going for offense. There's a lot of intrigue with how things are structured right now. And I'm fascinated to see how it plays out. I'm fascinated to get more information. We're going to update this every single week. We're not going to talk about it for as long of a time, but we're going to get some interesting tidbits each week about how the media is kind of seeing the Minnesota Vikings, how things are growing and progressing. This is one of those things. Emmanwori and Starks are the hot topics right now, but I think it's interesting how it continues to grow. And
what may be hot now may not be the hot topic in a month.
And I think that's another important thing. Benjamin Morrison was top 5 in selections over the past 5 weeks. So Benjamin Morrison has 22 overall selections. He had 1 February 17th through 23rd, 1 February 24th through March 2nd, 1 March 3rd through March 9th, none in the last 2 weeks. So he has pretty much dropped out of the running. There has only been 1 prospect. Sorry, we have 2 prospects, Dave. 2 that have been picked every single week. Cornerback Jahdae Barron, cornerback Siobhan Revel Jr. are the only 2 prospects that have been picked every single week by the media. It's interesting to look at kind of how things evolve, like in previous years. So let's take a look at last year. I can pop that out, JJ McCarthy had 1 selection in the first 4 weeks. Then he had 2 selections the week of January 29th, 2 the week of February 5th, then 8, 6, 8. And then right after the combine, 16, 29, 34, 20, 26, 23, 37. In the final week, 61 selections. Where conversely, for that final week for Dallas Turner, had a whopping 3. Nobody really knew that the Vikings were in on Dallas Turner. But in hindsight, we should have known. He was young at just 21 and a quarter, super athletic, and super versatile. We should have seen some kind of signal there, Dave. We really should have. But we didn't. And now we're looking at a spot where we could see some really interesting data points because unlike in past years, there isn't a single dire need on this roster. We don't desperately need to go find a quarterback in the future. We don't need a wide receiver. We don't need a cornerback. We don't need an edge rusher. We don't need an offensive lineman. We have needs that, hey, we draft that guy, they're going to make a difference. But if you don't draft a left guard, not the end of the world. If you don't draft a wide receiver 3, not the end of the world. If you don't draft a cornerback in the top 100, not the end of the world. They've set themselves up really well to be able to maximize his window and not have to panic about taking any one spot. And I think that's great. It also makes what we see with our data very, very interesting because Derek Harmon, he's still popular with the first wave. Like 3 selections this week, 4 last week, 8 of them post NFL Combine. So he's got 15 in the last 3 weeks. People still believe that Derek Harmon is a Minnesota Viking, and he's got a top 30 visit scheduled. I only have seen 3 top visits scheduled so far. One of them is Derek Harmon. One of them is Arizona running back Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And the third is Minnesota's Cody Lindenberg. Now, Lindenberg is free. You get certain colleges within, I think, 90 miles of your facility get to visit without costing you an extra one because it's like driving across town kind of thing. Where, hey, St. Paul, the U of N camp is about 15 miles from Eagan. Guess what? You go into TCO, go have fun for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way for the NFL, like NFL teams, to be able to see more players. And it doesn't really impact the players that much because they don't have to do a travel day. They just get in the car.
Right. And it's not 90 miles. We went over this last year. It's a specific viewing area type of deal. Your local big school.
Oh, I thought the rule was it was a 90-mile radius.
There's exceptions because you get teams like Minnesota that there's not a whole lot of huge schools around there. Or you get, versus New York. If you're Giants or Jets, you got tons of schools right there. The Steelers, it's all the Pennsylvania schools, Penn State, Pitt, all those, all fall into it.
Man, I should hope Pitt is one of them. They share a stadium.
But no, that's the general rule, 90 miles, but it's not hard fast. They take into account who's there.
Yeah.
I mean, who's around Green Bay?
UW. Madison's only like hour and a half, 2 hours.
Not Division I style schools, are they?
Wisconsin?
They're definitely not powerhouses. You got Wisconsin, that goes to the Rose Bowl every once in a century type thing, but
yeah, well, I mean, Wisconsin's been really good for the last 20 years. I hate to say it because, go Gophers and stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's never, there's not going to be a whole lot of equity when it comes to that because, as you said, maybe you can get Northwestern because they're on the, like in Chicago, and it's only like a couple hours to Milwaukee. But I mean, even in Milwaukee to Green Bay is a decent drive. Like, nothing's ever completely fair. But yeah, we're going to keep updating. I have a tracker going for top 30 visits. That's going to keep updating as we learn more. But Dave, I think it's time. But as we finish out the show, let's do a mock draft.
Let's do it. Welcome to Vikings First and SKOL's Mock Draft Mondays. Who will the Vikings pick? And who's your favorite choice?
All right. We're going to do a quick 7-rounder. No trades because we're running up a little bit on time, but we wanted to kind of look at maybe a little bit of a different mock. And this is I think this might be the first one we've done since we got pick 187. I can't remember if we did one last week or not.
We did.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes, sir. All right. Okay, so I think this is perfect, Dave. Malaki Starks is on the board. Let's do a draft where we have Malaki Starks, because the whole point of this show was really talking about the emergence of those safeties, Malaki Starks and Nick Emmanwori. So this is what a draft could look like if you take Malaki Starks. It looks like Tate Ratledge, Andrew Makuba, Lathan Ransom. Man, this sucks. It's so hard for me to see on this side. Like, it's blurry.
No, for the blind.
Oh, it's my screen. The whole eCam screen is blurry. It's not a you thing. Anthony Belton's an interesting one if you want to go offensive line. He might be a little bit more of a gap guy, but I think he's athletic enough. Kind of like the Ed Ingram archetype, where Ingram wasn't necessarily a perfect fit, but he was athletic enough to do the outside zone stuff. I think Belton is a guy who's athletic enough to do those kinds of things. I do think that because we get safety and with the flexibility that Malaki Starks give you, especially with being able to play nickel, I think we should do offensive line here. Let's take Anthony Belton. I think he's a good football player.
Is he going to play tackle or is he going to move inside?
Probably best to move inside, but you do have the flexibility to play tackle. And that flexibility as you're a backup is huge because it gives you the ability to stay on the roster. So he did play left tackle for North Carolina State. Showed a lot more athleticism than I expected at the Senior Bowl. And I think that was one of the things that really stood out to me. Plus, you know what? If Belton shows out in like training camp, hey, maybe you start him for a couple games because of Christian Darrisaw. You've got flexibility, but he's probably best as a guard long term. All right. Let's take a look. What do we got available at pick 139?
Will Howard, QB.
Will Howard might go day 2. So just be prepared for that. Chase Lunt is like 6'8". He's kind of archetype of Brian O'Neill. Rashard Smith is an interesting one. No, I can't see again.
Yeah, I shrunk it. You got Rashard Smith, Savion Jones, Quinn Ewers, Mitchell Evans, Jackery Crosby Merritt,
Cornelius,
Johnny Cornelius, Benjamin Urasek. Okay.
You're a Quest Hunter. Man, I was hoping, and you know what, he might be down the more we go down, but Quincy Riley's my boy. I love Quincy Riley. I would take him a corner in a heartbeat if he's available.
Let's see. I'm rolling.
I might. Why are you going to tight ends, Dave?
Just being different. We need a tight end just to add to the room.
We do. We talked about Conyers. We talked about Brenningstool. Urasek is interesting. People are talking about him with maybe some like top 50 love going into the year. Like, oh, he's going from Stanford to Georgia. He should get more playing time. And then he just didn't. He just came out real flat. So that's an interesting one. Evans, I'm not really sold on him. He's kind of like really Cole Kmet to me, where he's just kind of average. I don't like. I would much prefer to take a guy who's got some kind of plus traits in that, which is why we've taken Brenning Stool in the past, because I do think his ability as a pass catcher is a real plus. Urasek is interesting. I would want to be in a room with him and try to figure out what happened last year at Georgia and why he wasn't really able to really evolve. Dave, let's take a look at cornerback, because I do think cornerback is going to be an area where they're going to want to address at some point, even with the selection of Malaki Starks. I can't. Is that
Who's he?
Fuzzy? Okay. He's good. Quincy Riley obviously is my boy. O'Donnell Fortune has a lot of fans. Denzel Burke was projected to be maybe a round one guy. He kind of stinks. Longer beam, what a last name. Jason Marshall Jr. has got the prototype body of a cornerback, but he kind of tanked the last couple of years when he looked like he might be like a first round guy going into 2023. I think, I'm going to be real. We're just going to take Quincy Riley here. That dude is just so good at football. And people are way too low on him. I know he finally, he got some love earlier today in the Minnesota football party. Welcome. I've been here since January of 2024. I was right on his teammate, Brownlee Jr. I was right on Cam Hart. I am right on Quincy Riley. He's going to be really good in the National Football League. Quarterbacks at the top. Now, this is an interesting one. It's always good to take quarterbacks late in the draft to see if you can get that dart throw. The Packers used to get guys and flip them for draft picks. They would develop them and flip them. Mark Brunell, they got, I think, a second and a fifth. I think they got a similar package for Matt Hasselbeck. I don't think they do it here because they're limited capital. But if I had 7 or 8 picks, I would gladly take a shot on Kyle McCord and just have him in your room. 3 quarterbacks is easy to do in today's football because of the rules. So that is something to keep an eye on as the Vikings make a couple trades and get a bunch of picks. Like, that is a route they can go. And I think there's merit to taking Delton. Jalen Milroe's gone. I think Jalen Milroe goes top 50. That dude is, if you gave Jalen Hurts a cannon for an arm, that's what Milroe is. He's Jalen Hurts with plus traits. We took the offensive lineman early. We got 2 guys in the secondary. I kind of want to stay away from both of those positions. Monheim is interesting. That dude has no length whatsoever. And if a guy gets into his chest, he's done. But if he gets into the defender's chest, the defender is done. So for me, it's just a little bit too volatile, where I want to have a little bit more consistency in the offensive line. He played tackle, but he might be better at center in the National Football League because of the length issues. But his losses, the Senior Bowl, all length. They just whipped his butt. Caleb Bransaw is a really interesting prospect who ran in the 4.3s, so that's somebody to keep an eye on day 3. Wouldn't shock me if maybe snuck into day 2. One thing I've noticed with the PFF board is I have a lot of respect for Trevor Sikkema, but his rankings on some of these guys are very far off consensus, which is both good and bad. Bad because it can sometimes give a poor projection on what's going to happen in the NFL draft, but it's also good because we're not talking about somebody who's just conforming. He puts in the time and he comes with real opinions. So I will always respect people who do that, even if I genuinely disagree with the opinions. All right, Dave, we're going to go a little bit of a different direction. Let's pull up running back. I think the Vikings need to find a way to get a running back in this class. It's too good. There's too many starting caliber players. And the one that jumps off to me right away is Taj Brooks. Right away, he's your third down back. This dude is such a good pass catcher. He's phenomenal out of the shotgun. I love what Taj Brooks brings to the table. I also think, Dave, that he can develop other areas of this game because Texas Tech has been a air raid team for 2 decades. But under Joey McGuire, they've really started to run the ball. And Brooks was a huge catalyst of running the ball this year. I think you can get more out of him, but at worst, you have a core special teamer and you have a guy who is really good at all the third down elements.
They like the Malaki Starks.
Good.
Not so much on everything else, but they gave you an overall grade of A.
That is an A draft. That is how you do it. Save that image, David. Send it over to me. I'm gonna brag about it tonight on Twitter because we did it. We have fixed the Minnesota Vikings. Even though secondary they did bring in guys, they kept Byron Murphy Jr. They gave an extension to Theo Jackson. They have Harrison Smith coming back next year. They got Isaiah Rodgers under contract. I feel like they still need to add a high upside talent. Cornerback, I do believe, is more of a weak link position. You're never going to deny talent. We talked about this when the Sauce Gardner rumor came around. But it's more about having guys who aren't bad. Don't have an obvious weakness where you can just go attack. And we're talking about a unit that's fully healthy. Because if you have to play like corner 5 in the playoffs, they're just going to pepper that guy. And you just better hope that you can figure out how to stop it. So the way I see things working right now, I want to see how things grow and develop. I want to see how they can add more talent to the room. And I think they do need to add some more high-end talent. And I think we did so. I believe Quincy Riley is like a top 50 player in this class. Love his game. I'll shout it from the rooftops. That dude is my favorite prospect this year. He's going to be the captain of the All Forno team, which that will be coming out soon. And I'm excited. That's one of my favorite shows. Just talk about guys that I just love watching play football. But it's very interesting how this team's going to project forward with the draft, how things are going to manifest themselves with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I'm excited. I'm really excited about where this can go because it can go a million different directions. But while my mock draft tracker isn't a guarantee that the Vikings will go a certain direction, we have signal for two full years that help us project forward. And that's not nothing. But Dave, that's our show. I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. Like, comment, subscribe, please. We just passed 5,500 subscribers, considering we're barely over 2 years old. That's pretty incredible. We'd love to get to 10,000 by this time next year. Best way for you can do is hit that subscribe button. That's how you help. Spread the word. Let people know about us. We have fun here. Scolders and Spice, Tuesday or Thursday, Dave?
Tuesday.
Perfect. Real Forno Show will be back Wednesday. And don't forget, 2 Bloggers on Sunday, where Darren is finally on time consistently. We're very proud of him. And then we're going to have some more draft stuff. Been a little chaotic. I keep saying we're going to do it, and we are going to do it. But we haven't quite been able to get it done yet just because of a bunch of different factors. So thank you guys for joining us. Like, comment, subscribe. Do all the fun things. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes. I like to read those. I want to see some real 5-star reviews. If you love us, please fill one out. I'd love to see it. If you don't love us, well, that's okay. Thanks for giving us a shot anyways. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings, everybody.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching The Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!